Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Maintaining Resilience in a Virtual World. Clearly, this is a topic that's resonating with people as we've had over 1,300 people register for this. My name is Kat Duco, and I'm the Marketing and Business Development Manager at the Myers-Briggs Company. I'll be assisting with questions and comments throughout, and due to the large number of participants, we will keep everyone on mute to avoid background noise, so please participate using the questions box feature on your GoToWebinar side panel. Before we get started, I'll quickly introduce you to the Myers-Briggs Company. Our mission is to inspire everyone to lead more successful and fulfilling lives. We deliver on our mission through various approaches, including consulting solutions, research services, certification training, and through our range of assessments. Our goal is to maximize the performance of leaders, teams, and organizations through the use of our psychometric tools and professional services. Sharing our expertise is also part of what we do as a certified B Corporation, which is a movement we're incredibly proud to be a part of. Being a B Corp is about balancing profit with purpose, putting a focus on our environment, people, and the community around us as a part of everything that we do. Today's webinar will run for about an hour and will be facilitated by Dr. Martin Bolt, Senior Director of Professional Services and Psychologist at the Myers-Briggs Company. In his work as a psychologist for the last 22 years, Martin has worked with individuals and organizations to enhance their psychological well-being, particularly at work. You may have seen some of his well-being research in recent media publications or in the articles the Myers-Briggs Company has been sharing. Organizations regularly engage Martin to help business leaders and teams achieve their potential through psychological insights. In today's webinar, he will share recent research about the current changes and pressures many of us are experiencing, particularly while working virtually. So Martin, based on the large number of people who've registered for our webinar today, I wonder if you're like many of us who are experiencing some big changes in your work.
Yes, thanks, Kat. And firstly, thank you for everyone who's joined our webinar. And I agree, Kat, it's obviously a topic that's very top of mind for many of us. And for me, of the many periods of change I've experienced in my professional life, and some changes welcome and others less welcome, recently we have been experiencing rapid and significant change globally, which is really testing the resilience of many of us, including myself. And for me, there's been a very quick transition to working remotely full-time, even though I was doing that to some extent before our current pandemic. But that has meant that I'm doing all my training virtually and my consulting with my clients, all at the same time while having multiple people in my home, either trying to continue their work or their university or school studies. And all this while we experience what feels like very unpredictable time with the effects of the pandemic and, of course, the disruptions and adjustments that people are making in their personal work lives. So today I'm really trying to offer some perspective and takeaways that will help any of us be more aware of what may trigger our stress reactions, and also how understanding our personality helps build resilience in ways that are going to fit or work for us. As Kat mentioned, we're going to invite you to participate through the webinar by responding to and sharing questions and insights during the session. And first of all, we're interested in your views about what are you most concerned about this week. So as Kat mentioned, you can share your thoughts or your responses by typing your response into the questions box. And as we have quite a large audience today, we'll give a few moments for people to type their responses in. So if you'd like to go ahead and do that. And then Kat will help share a bit of a summary of what people are sharing with regards to their concerns. And I guess given the number of people that have joined us on our webinar today, it's really indicating that resilience is an important topic for many of us. So while you're sharing your thoughts in the questions box, we're asking this because the stresses that we are facing now, this week and this month, are quite new and unique for many of us compared to what people might have found stressful 10 years ago. And when we did some research into what people found stressful, looking at the same question 10 years ago, things like public speaking came out as the most stressful activities that they could do. And this chart on screen was directly taken from the research report we produced at the time. For example, most people didn't find socialising particularly stressful 10 years ago, nor was travelling on public transport all that stressful unless your train was running late, or if you were sitting next to a person on the train who looked like they'd had a bit too much to drink. But right now, those particular activities come with some risks. So the time is right to talk about stress and what it means for us, because many of us are actually living and experiencing a stressful time at present. At the beginning of this year, particularly in Australia, there was other events that could have contributed significant stress. For example, in Australia, we were experiencing devastating bushfires, which was a cause of concern for many people, particularly those directly impacted. But since that time, in only a matter of months, the arrival of the COVID-19 virus has brought all sorts of new concerns to the surface. In particular, things like people being concerned about the company that they work for, and will it actually get through the situation? Or will they have a job after things have settled down? Some people are finding that they're challenged by coping with working from home or working remotely, or having concerns about the health of their family and friends. And other people might be really feeling an experience of challenge or frustration by not being able to do some of the things that we normally find enjoyable or rewarding, such as eating out or going to the gym or catching up with friends. So I wonder to what extent these kind of issues or thoughts resonate with you when we asked you what was top of mind by way of your concerns. So Kat, I might just check in with you. What sort of concerns have people been sharing today with us?
We've had a lot of participation. Thank you, everyone. So some different ones that have come through, different themes: the workload, preparing for more remote homeschooling, particularly in Victoria. It's one I can relate to. Job security, not knowing when I can see my family and friends again, the financial stability, and staying safe and well. Those are the main themes.
Well, thanks for pulling that together, Kat. And I'm sure if we had more time today, we'd probably find there could be some other areas, or in fact related areas. But they all sound like very real and common concerns that we all probably face to some extent. So what we'd like you to now do is continue sharing and participating with you, and we'd like you to let us know how you're feeling about dealing with these stresses, just by responding to a quick poll that Kat's going to launch on the screen. So the question is, how concerned are you about your ability to manage stress during this crisis? So we now have the poll on screen for you to vote. So please select the response that fits for you. And again, with our large audience today, we'll allow a bit of time for everyone to vote. And then I'll again ask Kat to provide a bit of a summary or highlight for us what was coming through in your responses. And you can see the range of responses you could select from is very concerned, somewhat concerned, a little concerned, or not at all concerned. So we'll just give a moment there for people to list their responses to that. And then we'll be able to see how people are feeling about their ability to respond to stress. So Kat, how are the responses looking? Are they still coming in, or have we got some results starting to come through?
Yep, yeah, we've got most people voted, so I'll go ahead and close it now. Thank you all again for participating in that, and I'm just posting the results on the screen. So see, most people selected either somewhat concerned or a little concerned.
Okay, great. And I'm just having trouble seeing the percentages there for those two groups. What are the percentages you've got for those, Kat?
Sorry about that. So I'll share again. The percentages, so 10% are very concerned, 38% somewhat concerned, 39% a little concerned, and 13% not at all concerned.
Okay, great. All right, so again, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts on that particular question. And I guess we asked you that question because that was a question we've asked another group of people earlier in the year as the COVID pandemic started to increase and spread and create a whole lot of change. You can see the group of people that we asked this year who participated in the study, and in terms of working from home, 3/4 of the respondents to this survey were remote workers or virtual workers or working from home, and most of these had only recently changed to remote or virtual working as a result of the crisis. Now, their responses to the same question, you can see what's listed there by way of the percentages. And I guess what really stood out for us is when we looked at the percentage of people who were responding to either being somewhat concerned or very concerned about their ability to manage stress, that was getting close to half of the group. So I guess in comparison to our group today, there's less in the very concerned bracket, which is great, but still a notable percentage in the somewhat concerned as well. And then to dig into a little bit more detail about that study that we did earlier in the year, let's look at the specific concerns that our survey respondents had as a result of the crisis that we're currently facing. And then we'll look at some of the things that might be important for you as well. The thing that was most worrying people this year at the top of the list was the economy going into recession. And again, this was an international sample, but of course had a high percentage of people responding from the United States, so they could reflect particular local conditions. 27% were somewhat concerned about the economy, 51%, which is more than half, were very concerned. So in total, that 78% of people had that really top of mind as a concern. Other major worries were people's health and the health of their family and friends. The public not following official guidance, and to a slightly lesser extent, the long-term effects of the current situation on people, the company that people work for. The thing that they were least concerned about was the relationship with their spouse or partner, though even there you can see in some of the results there are some worries. And what we also found was that things that most concern people and their stress triggers were different depending on their personality type, because that was one of the other aspects we included in this research. And I'll come back later in our session to the role of personality. Now, this might not be the order of worries or concerns you might choose personally, and that reflects the fact that the things that most concern people and their stress triggers were different depending on their personality type preferences. Because the things that concern us will depend on our personal circumstances or the situation we find ourselves in, but also who we are and how our personality interacts with the situation that we're in. So in this webinar, I'm going to focus on how knowledge of personality, in particular understanding our own personality, can help us better deal with the things that we might find stressful, and more importantly, find ways to boost our resilience to cope with the stress we might be experiencing. So why is paying attention to stress important? Well, it's important not just for us as an individual, but it's also important for organisations and groups that we work with, because stress does affect performance, and it's a well-known and well-documented finding from psychological research. But when we think about stress, there are healthy or effective levels of it, and then there can be unhealthy levels. So we all need a degree of some stimulation or a level of stress in order to perform at our best. If we had no stimulation or any level of stress, we'd essentially be asleep. As stimulation or stress increases, we become more alert until we reach our peak level of performance. And this is kind of where people feel like they're in their sweet spot of having an element of stress that helps them focus, but also feeling still in control and capable of dealing with what they have to work through. But if stress continues beyond that point, we actually start to feel more anxious. And if the stress continues and doesn't ease up, we can actually get into an experience of extreme stress, and that's where we can feel overwhelmed, or some people might even feel like they're feeling like they're collapsing under the weight of the stress. Now, most of us and most people we work with won't get to that final stage of collapse, but lots of us are likely to be potentially in the orange zone for everyday stress. And that might mean that we're not performing as well as we could. And if we don't do anything about it, then there is a risk of heading more into a dangerous level of stress and feeling like we're getting dragged into a downward spiral. And if we are in an organisation where some staff have been stood down or laid off, there is every chance that there'll be even more pressure on us, and the effects of poor performance are potentially even greater as a result of that growing challenge and anxiety. So it's really important to understand what things might trigger or contribute to us feeling stress, and the effects of the stress on us, and how we can pull ourselves out of that downward spiral. And an important aspect of knowing how to help us minimize that downward spiral is, of course, understanding our personality. Now, personality is obviously not one thing, but a very well researched and understood and validated model of personality is based on the Myers-Briggs type indicator measure, which measures Jung's theory of personality types. Some of you may have encountered this or experienced the model or have a good understanding of it. And what we do know from many years of research and application with this model of personality is our stress triggers and stress reactions and how we recover very much relate to our individual personality type. So let's look at how familiar everyone today in our webinar session is familiar with the MBTI. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do, just to get a sense of it, is if you have in fact completed the actual MBTI assessment and a feedback or verification process, and you've identified what your best fit type is, the personality type of the 16 that you think represents you when you're just being you in your natural state, we'll ask you just to type your 4-letter type code into the question box now. And if you need a reminder of what the types are, we've got the 16 types listed on screen, so that might prompt the memory. And just to give a moment or two for everyone to type in their types into the question box. And then, Kat, it'd be great if you could maybe start to share with us the personality types you're seeing that people are sharing as part of our session today.
Yeah, it looks like we have almost every type represented. So ISFJ, INFJ, ENTP, ENFP, ISFJ. Yeah, I think we still have, we do have an ever elusive ISTP present. So we do have every type, it looks like, coming through.
Excellent. Well, that's great, because I think obviously in a big audience, we'd expect all the 16 types to be represented to some extent. So thanks for sharing your types. So maybe to hone in on looking at the aspects of the MBTI model that might help us understand more about triggers for stress. So starting with the first pair of preferences, extroversion and introversion. And these preferences really give us an understanding of what we find energizing mentally and from within our personality, but also what we might find draining. So people who prefer extroversion are, when they're feeling comfortable and relaxed, are naturally energized by things that are going on around them. And that, in fact, helps keep them interested and stimulated. Whereas people who prefer introversion are naturally energized by opportunities to reflect inwardly and think about what's happening within themselves. And that keeps them stimulated. When extroverts find themselves experiencing stress, it can be in situations where they're expected or only spending time alone, and there's not opportunity to interact with the outer world or people around them, or not enough external stimulation. Whereas people who prefer introversion often report that spending too much time with others or too much external stimulation can be quite distracting and challenging for them. Now, in our current period of time where there is, as we talked about, those other concerns and pressures that might be playing a part, here are some other recent aspects that each of these type groups might find potentially triggers of their stress. So some extroverts will often find working remotely might mean that then they don't have the opportunity to interact with the usual number of people or activities around them, or there's insufficient stimulation in their home environment where they're working, or not being able to socialize or be in the outer world could be a sign of a source of stress for them. Whereas people who prefer introversion are reporting that actually being at home with more people than usual, such as their family or housemates, could be a source of stress, or having too many online meetings, the expectation of frequent interactions with not much downtime, or the expectation of not needing any contact could be a challenge, or not being able to work from home in the future is a sign of what might be a source of stress for them. Now, in much of our literature around the MBTI model and managing stress, there are numerous strategies and coping methods that people have shared with us that work for them. But a simple way of thinking about this is have a think about where your preferences are on these two areas and what might help you start to feel less stressed, or what would help you feel more contained and composed that would play to your type strengths. So for extroverts, think about if you have insufficient interaction with people in the outside world, what can be some ways you can do that in a practical way in the current situation? Or if you prefer introversion, how might you get some space, both mental and physical, to recharge and reflect and gain some more composure that way? So let's move to the next pair of preferences, sensing and intuition. And for those who are familiar, you might be aware that these preferences are the ones that we rely on or use when we're taking information or trying to understand the world. People who prefer sensing like to understand the world through tangible, factual, and realistic information, particularly what they can see, hear, touch, and taste and smell. People who prefer intuition are more interested in understanding the world as it comes through in themes or patterns or a big picture understanding of it, and also are more stimulated or inspired by looking at what could be. So you can see what might be some common sources of stress for these type groups. Those who prefer sensing often find that when things are ambiguous or there's no clear direction, or they're expected to try or apply ideas without any foundational purpose, that can be quite stressful for them. Or people who prefer intuition, having to follow exact instructions step by step, or being asked for specific details can be a source of stress for them. Now, in our current situation, those who prefer sensing might actually be experiencing that there is a degree of ambiguity around rules or restrictions or social distancing guidelines, or a lack of role clarity as a result of changes in their workplace, or even just having a very unstructured, content-free virtual meetings, which might be occurring now. Whereas those who prefer intuition might be finding too many detailed rules or instructions an aspect of stress for them, or poor channels for communicating ideas, or may in fact be thinking what's going to happen in the future. So again, think about what would help you manage those signs or triggers of stress as they relate to your preference. And going back to what usually works for you is a good way of responding to those stress triggers. Then we go on to the next pair of preferences, which is thinking and feeling. These are the preferences in our personality that we use to help decide or come to conclusions, or what we prefer to prioritize. People who prefer thinking are often trying to reach outcomes and decisions that lead to a logical, objective solution. People who have a feeling preference are trying to make decisions or conclusions that lead to consensus or harmony. So thinking preference people often report that having to base their decisions purely on subjective or illogical elements could be quite stressful for them, or being asked to solely focus on how a decision affects people without considering the impact on the task or the problem can be stressful. Whereas people who prefer feeling will often report not having their values respected or considered as part of the decision, or even having to deal with conflict and a lack of harmony, a source of stress. Now, in a current situation, thinking type people might be finding that some of the decisions made, particularly by government or organisations, don't appear logical, or that people don't seem to follow what is being said in a logical fashion, particularly through virtual communication, or being called on to do a lot of support for others without knowing how to solve problems could be stressful for them. Or people who prefer feeling will often describe that close friends and family and disconnection from that by social distancing might be a source of stress, or not having emotional support available, or continually worrying about the impact of the situation on others and not taking care of their own needs could be a source of stress. So again, think about what helps you bring your type preference back to a level of comfort, and how could you navigate some of the decisions you're making in a way that honors your preferences. And finally, the last pair of preferences in the MBTI model, judging and perceiving, look at how we prefer to approach the outside world, and in particular, how we like to get things done and use our time. So people who prefer judging are most motivated and satisfied when they're bringing things to closure and getting things settled and finished. Whereas people who prefer perceiving are quite motivated and stimulated when they can explore all the options before bringing things to a conclusion. So those who prefer judging might find that when things are disorganized or there aren't clear plans with people and organization, or having to do things at the last minute up near a deadline is a source of stress for them. Whereas people who prefer perceiving might find that having to work inflexibly or stick to plans in a very rigid way could be a source of stress, or being expected to make decisions before they have considered the options could be a challenge. And in our current situation, those who prefer judging might find sudden and unpredictable changes in routine, or a separation from having no separation between their work and home, or the virtual nature of work requires people to be very flexible, or people not following clear guidelines or plans could be a source of stress for them. Whereas those who prefer perceiving might be experiencing challenges around not having opportunities to be as playful or light-hearted or spontaneous in our current situation, whereas that is normally a source of satisfaction or motivation for perceiving types. Or enforcing what might appear irrelevant plans or processes, or having a lack of variety or spontaneity could be a stressful element for those who prefer perceiving. So again, if any of that rings true for you, maybe think about what you could do on a day-to-day basis that brings in some of what works for your type preferences. So what I've been looking at here, or what we've just looked at, is really looking at one pair of preferences in the type model at a time. But we don't actually operate and behave just one pair of preferences at a time. And those who are familiar with the MBTI model will be well aware that these preferences, when they come together to form our personality type, provide a much richer and sophisticated way of understanding how any one of us might deal with the world, and particularly deal with stress. So when we think of one of the personality types, for example, a person who has preferences for ENFP, and what they might typically experience when they're feeling stressed, it's not just simply about their extroversion, but it's how those other preferences start to play a part in their experience of stress. And the originator of the type theory, Carl Jung, also had a keen interest in understanding what are the experiences and likely outcomes for any of the personality types when they experience stress. We know from his work and research that in the initial stages of stress, any one of the MBTI types can feel stressed and tends to rely on or overuse their natural preferences, which results in feeling not ourselves or not feeling in balance. So why does this happen? So to think about the different levels of stress that we might experience and the different stages that occur. When we understand our personality type with those 4 letters, those who are familiar with the MBTI model will be aware that the 2 middle letters of our type become very important in how our personality is experienced by those around us, particularly when we're either at our best or under pressure. We refer to those 2 middle preferences as our core characters, and they play a big part in helping us understand how we might behave and also what we might look like to others when we're feeling stressed. But starting with the comfort zone. When we find ourselves in the comfort zone, we're at our best. This is where we are able to use a balance between the different parts of our personality, and we're able to respond to different situations by choosing and consciously flexing our behavior according to what we need to do in the situation. This is when we find ourselves being able to offer our strengths and talents as they relate to our personality type. But when any one of us starts to experience an element of stress, we start to move into the stretch zone. And as stress increases, we all have a tendency to revert to type. That is, we behave more and more in ways that reflect our preferences, and we often find we have less capacity to flex or adapt our behavior to meet the needs of the situation. And this is what I was referring to before about being a bit more exaggerated in our behavior as it reflects our preferences. Or we might start to come across as a more immature version of our personality type. And that is because we are lacking in the ability to adopt different perspectives. So we refer to this as stage 1 of the stress reaction. It's the initial signs of stress. And from our research and from Carl Jung's work, he identified that when we start to get into the stretch zone, we start to behave in an exaggerated way. And that exaggeration reflects our type. For example, people with a preference for extroversion will tend to become more louder and more active when under stress. And that means they're neglecting to spend time reflecting about what they're doing in the outer world. Or people who prefer introversion in the stretch zone will instead become more and more internally focused, meaning they appear to withdraw from the external world and might become quite uncommunicative or feel trapped within inside their heads. So a takeaway here is, if you know your type and you know you're starting to overuse your preferences, that's a bit like a warning light on the dashboard of your car that says, hey, pay attention, you're starting to get into that imbalanced way of behaving. Now, for some of us, the stress may not let up, which might mean that we move more into the next phase, which is the meltdown zone. If this pattern goes on for an extended period, or when we feel ill or tired or fatigued, we go beyond the stretch zone and we start to experience a more extreme version of stress. And this is where some people call it, they start to see red. Or this is sometimes referred to in the MBTI model as being in the group of our unconscious parts of our personality. So in this stage, we start to behave in ways that are quite uncharacteristic, or in many ways almost opposite to our normal selves. To most of us, this stage will feel like we're out of control, and to an observer, it might look like that we're behaving beside ourselves, not our usual selves. So understanding this process can be quite helpful and reassuring, because it helps all of us know that it's a normal outcome of experiencing prolonged and stressful situations. And once you have identified your type, you can be a bit more conscious and aware of how to minimize the stress, or how to minimize it getting into the meltdown zone, and also finding ways to recover and get back into normal balance. So this is where we see that self-awareness is crucial in helping any one of us not only be aware of our stress warning signs, but how to respond to stress in a more conscious and adaptive way. Indeed, if we're unaware of our preferences or our personality, we tend to find that we might be the victim of those behaviors when we find ourselves in a stressful situation. And there's plenty of research to show that having a sense of control by knowing who we are and how we naturally behave can help, just by knowing that we have a way of understanding what's occurring to us. So when we talk about resilience, what are we really meaning here? Now, in physics, resilience is defined as the ability of a material to absorb energy when it's deformed and to release that energy upon unloading, a bit like a spring bouncing back. For psychology, psychological resilience is the ability of a person to bounce back to a previous state of normal functioning after experiencing pressure without negative effect or minimal negative effects. And I'm sure there have been times in all of our lives where we've found that we could bounce back or recover from a challenging situation. So what helps us do that? Was some really interesting insights and research by an author, Diane Coutu, who published in the Harvard Business Review 3 important strategies for helping any one of us build resilience. The first is to accept reality and being willing to face up to what is actually going on, the good and the bad. Finding a purpose is also crucial for resilience, and that's where we try to make sense of or look for a wider meaning in the situation that we find ourselves in. And again, looking for meaning even when things are difficult or challenging. And the third element she identified was the capacity to improvise. When we try out new and different approaches or use all available resources to adapt to the situation we're in. And Coutu's work was really put together by studying people who'd faced very extreme, challenging, stressful and adverse situations. She said a lot of the time when we see someone feeling pressure or stress, we may encourage them to be positive about difficult situations. But in her work, she found that overly optimistic people don't do so well as those who might accept the reality of the situation. What she means here is people who believe everything will turn out right and just assume it will, can get downhearted when things remain tough. And in actual fact, she pointed to some examples from survivors of prisoner of war camps who said that those who believed will be out of the prison by Christmas seemed to die of a broken heart. And I know this is an extreme example, but also relevant to all of us, as it can bring a sense of waiting for something to turn out right rather than taking stock and taking action, which is more important for resilience. So it is helpful to have those core strategies for resilience, but how can any one of us help to work to develop those? Well, again, turning to the psychological research from the American Psychological Association, here we've summarized what they've found over many years and from research as to what are some practical everyday tips that would be helpful for building resilience or fostering it, and also what can be unhelpful. So if you look down the list of the helpful, it includes things with maintaining and building our connections with family and friends, being able to keep a perspective even in the face of adversity, accepting that change is part of living and that we have to undertake it, being realistic in the goals that we set, taking action to address the issues we need to rather than avoiding them, looking for opportunities where we can learn more about ourselves or discover hidden strengths, finding a way to nurture ourselves in a positive way and care for ourselves, and also the practical things of maintaining a healthy lifestyle, be it through exercise or eating healthy, and finding things that we find enjoyable. So maybe ask yourself, are you currently engaging in any of those helpful strategies if you're feeling under pressure or stressed at present? It's also worth reminding ourselves what was found to not be helpful, including over-relying on watching TV or, for that matter, devices of any kind, or surfing the net and avoiding what might be important activities that we need to address, overindulgence in food, alcohol, or avoiding healthy habits that relate to exercising, and in fact even over-socializing, or the opposite, being isolated, can impact our resilience. And if you find yourself using any of those unhelpful ones, maybe step back and say, what can you do to substitute it with one of the helpful tips? And as I mentioned earlier, that our MBTI type will give us some clues and insights into how any one of us might be able to deal with the current situation. So we have a set of tips, resilience boosters, for each of the MBTI personality types. And this was helpfully put together by members of our international faculty who are MBTI practitioners and experts, who really summarize and synthesize what would be some helpful strategies and ways of acting that might boost the resilience of the 16 MBTI types, particularly when we're in our current situation with the pandemic. And we shared on the screen there 2 of the MBTI types, an INTP type and an ESFJ type. And in particular, you can see that what works for one type may not be the same for another. So it's a good reminder that our personalities give us clues as to what we might find helpful and what others who are different to us might find helpful. And essentially, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. As we get towards the end of our webinar, I'll point out where you can access some of these resources and use or share them with your friends and colleagues. What we've also been doing work on, and my colleague and I, Dr. Rich Thompson, have been focusing in on particularly well-being, psychological well-being. And we know this is important because our psychological well-being actually underpins or supports resilience. And we're into our 4th year of research and study on this, but from the last 3 years of study, where we undertook a global workplace well-being research of over 10,000 people from 131 countries, we found some fascinating insights about people's well-being at work. And we also were interested in exploring potential differences between occupational groups, age groups, personality types, and countries. But to summarize some standout findings from our research, we also were asking people what supported their well-being at work. And here we have on screen the top 5 activities amongst dozens that we asked people about that people reported were highly effective for supporting their well-being at work. Now, as you look down the list, you can actually see that many of these are approaches or strategies that don't come with significant financial expense. And indeed, many of them are things that we could build into our daily or weekly work experiences. So have a think if any of these activities have a positive impact on your well-being and work. And if you're not able to do them currently, what could be some ways you could start to choose one or more of those and bring it into your work experience? And you can see there that strategies such as finding work that you're interested in or dedicating time in your day where you're learning something new can be powerful ways of boosting and supporting our well-being, which ultimately has a positive effect on our resilience. And for those who are maybe wondering, yes, we're doing the wellbeing study again this year, 2020, which will be an interesting year to explore workplace wellbeing given what we're all going through. So keep an eye out for our research findings when we publish them later in the year. Now, there isn't time in our session to go through all the strategies for every 16 MBTI types and how to bring things back into balance or to work with stress. But what we are going to provide to those of you joining our webinar today is a list of some very detailed resources that you can take away and decide for yourself what might be helpful. And these resources are a part of our webinar attachments, but also on our website, we have a section dedicated to developing your virtual workforce where you'll find more of these tips and strategies. In particular, if you are joining us today and you're a qualified MBTI practitioner, you'll find on our website resources that you can use with your clients or colleagues. In particular, practitioner resources that look at the 16 MBTI types and targeted and detailed tips and strategies of how each of the 16 types can respond to stress or recover from stress in a constructive way. So again, go to the practitioner resources if you're looking to build that into your work and support with your colleagues and clients. We've also put together an ebook that talks through some of the background to stress, particularly some of the things we've touched on in our webinar today, and some of the things that we've highlighted as tips and strategies are also listed in this ebook. So if you're wanting to discuss or explore this further, again, within your organization or with your clients, please feel free to go to our website to download the Raising Awareness About Stress ebook. And as I mentioned, if you know your MBTI type, there is an option to learn more about what might be some triggers of stress for your personality type. So again, on our website, we have these downloadable, what we're calling stress heads, which summarize the most common triggers that each of the personality types reports as being a sign or a trigger for their stress. You can also look at what are the triggers for the other MBTI types different to your own. So it's also a reminder that some of the things that you might find stressful, other people wouldn't. And equally, some of the things that they find stressful, you may not. And that can be really helpful, particularly when we're working with others who you might start to see that they're showing some signs of feeling a bit overwhelmed or stressed. And we've also created a short guide to the stress triggers and stress reactions for each of the MBTI types. So you can use this to recognize your own reactions and also as a guide to seeing how stressed you might be, but also how to support those who might be stressed and a different personality type to yourself. And this particular handout we've included as a downloadable attachment as part of our webinar today. So feel free to download that and share it where you think it would be helpful. And we've also produced specific tips for things that have emerged in 2020 around the world of work, particularly remote work. So if you're looking for some more tips and strategies of how to support people, particularly based around the MBTI preferences from working from home or creating workspaces or work patterns that would support yourself and also help you feel more energized, please visit our website and download those tips and strategies for working in a virtual world in a way that can align and support your personality preferences. We've also found over our recent webinars, particularly around virtual work that we've been doing this year, that a number of people who are leading and managing teams virtually are finding new and interesting challenges that emerge from this. So we've put together a managing virtual teams summary, and this has actually came about because we got lots of requests and comments from clients saying, what are some helpful ways to better work with and managing people in a virtual environment, and also keeping people engaged and supported. And what we do know from what we're hearing is people are at times feeling quite afraid to talk about things like having difficulty concentrating while they're working virtually because they're already worried about potentially their job security or a perception that they might be seen as slacking off. And the fact that most of us are working remotely with less easy communication than when we're in the offices together can result in misunderstanding or making things worse. And this is where we've mapped out behaviours at above the surface level, the top of the iceberg, and what people might be seeing, but also what could be the underlying drivers or factors that might be producing those behaviours, just so there's a shared understanding of what might be causing some stress for people. So again, feel free to download that resource if it's helpful. And as I did mention, we do have those tips for all 16 MBTI types that have been put together, particularly for how we might support ourselves and those closest to us during this period of time where the world is responding to the challenges arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. So this resource is something that you can share with anyone, and it really gives some very practical tips for any of us to explore. So let's summarize what we've been talking about in our session today, and also maybe to think about where we could go from here. So as a summary, we've tapped into, and you did share some of the common concerns that we're experiencing right now. And I think it's important to acknowledge that these are real concerns. They're not parts of our imagination. We also looked at the stresses that any one of us might experience, and particularly how different stresses might have more of an impact on some personality preferences than others. I also shared with you what might be some warning signs or triggers that highlight how to spot stress and what are normal and typical reactions that any one of us might experience when we start to feel stress, and also how to start dealing with the stress and build resilience. And again, there are a wide range of resources that we're offering and wanting you to tap into if it's going to help you, your family, and your colleagues. And Kat will point out some more things that might be helpful to you as part of joining our webinar today. So I might hand over to Kat, and if you'd like to share what might be some next steps with everyone today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Martin. And thank you all again for joining the webinar today. Martin shared some really great insights and tips for maintaining resilience, particularly when keeping in mind one's own personality preferences. There's a lot more to this topic than what we're able to cover in a 1-hour webinar, as Martin mentioned. We will be taking questions in a few moments, which you can submit through the questions box on your GoToWebinar side panel. Or if you would like to schedule a personalized discussion, please do get in touch with me or one of my team members. And while we wait for questions to come through, I'll just share a bit more about our company, including some resources available for virtual teams. For those of you that are new to the Myers-Briggs company, we work with our clients in a few different ways. We offer consulting services where one of our experienced trainers, like Martin, can design and deliver a customized solution to meet your business requirements. We can partner with you and be as involved in your projects as you want us to be, whether that's co-facilitating or helping you behind the scenes with designing your workshops. Or if you want to manage all aspects of design and delivery yourself, you can join our assessment certification programs to gain the knowledge and tools that you need to build that capability internally. We're most well known for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, but we do have other tools to support the entire talent lifecycle, including emotional intelligence tools, leadership 360s, and talent selection tools. So if you want more information about our assessments and services, our website's a great place to start, themyersbriggs.com. And as Martin highlighted, we do have new web pages with resources specific to developing your virtual workforce that have a lot of really great resources built into it. So from our homepage, you can click the second banner that looks like the one pictured on the screen to navigate to the virtual workforce pages. And there you can find many of the complementary resources that Martin referenced just now, such as tip sheets, quick guides, and infographics. And we also have information on virtual team building workshops. So as we discussed in the webinar today, teams and organizations are working more often in virtual settings, so we have created solutions to support teams and individuals based on the most requested topics like building resilience, managing change, and enhancing communication. These are short 90-minute workshops to help increase self-awareness and appreciate differences in others through interactive dialogue, group exercises, and question and answer segments. Our expert consultants will help you, your teams create individual and team action plans to leverage their learning and boost employee engagement. So if you want to learn more about those 90-minute virtual workshops, please do check out our website or contact our team. If you're considering MBTI certification, we have recently launched virtual programs. The virtual MBTI certification program provides a highly interactive experience that gives participants plenty of opportunity to engage with the facilitator as well as with each other. Our virtual programs are filling up quickly. In fact, we added a second concurrent session in August to accommodate demand, and we have just a few seats remaining in that August program. You can either enroll for the program of your choice online, or feel free to contact our team if you need assistance. I also want to note that we can coordinate in-house programs that are exclusive to your organization on your preferred dates, whether that's facilitated in person or virtually. Okay, so now let's turn to questions, and a few have come through. The first one is, when does stress go from being something that we can manage to a deeper mental health issue? And is there a line that we should be looking for to refer to another team?
Yeah, really important question, Kat. So that's a good thing to keep in mind, that what I was walking us through today with regards to stress responses, stress reactions, fit within what, from a psychologist's point of view, we describe as the normal reactions to stress. And when I say normal, that any one of us who are at a point in time when we're normally healthy and feeling well adjusted could experience those signs of stress and reactions to stress. There is a point, though, if the stress continues and the person starts to feel overwhelmed, that might eventuate into a more significant and diagnosable psychological illness or a mental illness concern. And that's really where a person needs extra professional support. Locally, what I often highlight for clients is if they're feeling at that point and it's gone beyond sort of the typical stress reactions, a great place to start is with their local doctor, the general practitioner, who can then connect them into the appropriate mental health services. But when it does start to tip over into people starting to have an impact on not just their work, but other parts of their life, and it's not improving, that's probably a good time to seek out that professional medical and psychological advice.
Great, thanks, Martin. Another question is, are some MBTI types more stressed than others?
Yeah, this is actually a question that I've been asked many times over many years. So here's what we know, that all MBTI personality types can experience stress, and all MBTI personality types can be resilient. What we do know, and I think I highlighted this today, is certain situations or environments can be more stressful for some types than others. And we do have a huge range of research, particularly captured in our latest manual for the MBTI assessment, the global step 1, step 2 assessment, where we have numerous studies showing what are the kind of activities, environments that each of the types might find stressful and what their reactions are to that. So to answer the question, there's no one personality type that's more stressed than others, but certain environments might be they work environments or school environments or even home environments, what is expected or how people are encouraged to behave might consistently be unhelpful for certain personality types. So it's probably thinking about the environment and how the person's personality type interacts with it that will pinpoint who's more susceptible to stress than others.
Great, thanks. And I'm aware we're coming up against time here, so maybe just one more quick one here. Where can I get more information about well-being tips?
Yeah, sure. So I mentioned that we have published a number of articles on our wellbeing research, but I think, Kat, on the part of our webpage that you described where we have the downloadable information, we have put together both tips and strategies for managing wellbeing, but also a summary of our research findings of what a wider range of activities than the top 5 I shared that people reported as effective or less effective for managing their wellbeing. So that's probably best sourced through our website, or again, if you need to contact us directly, one of our team can help point you in the direction of that. But Kat, you might have some other thoughts on how to access that.
Yeah, of course. So as Martin mentioned, the Developing Your Virtual Workforce web pages do have a lot of resources built into them. We also have a resources tab on our, you see it on any of our web pages actually, and it has even more information, case studies, ebooks and tip sheets, research and white papers. There's a lot of information out there, and of course our team is always here to help if you're looking for anything in particular. And I know we're up against time here, we're just about out, so I just want to say there are some really good questions coming through. I know we're not getting to everybody in this moment, but we will follow up with you individually to make sure that your question is answered. So keep an eye out for our emails. We'll also be sending the recording and notes to everybody today from the webinar. The notes will include links to all the various resources that we highlighted, so you can find them quickly and easily. So that email will go out tomorrow with all those links included. So again, thank you all for coming to the webinar today. We really appreciate your fantastic participation.